Commander Zyx'tal of the Galactic Reconnaissance Force pressed his all four eyes shut and reopened them, certain he must be hallucinating. His chromatophores flickered between shades of disbelief purple and horror green as he watched the scene below through his quantum-enhanced binoculars. "Lieutenant VRZs," he whispered to his science officer, "please tell me your atmospheric readings are showing some kind of hallucinogenic gas in the area." The lieutenant's tentacles twitched nervously as she checked her instruments for the third time. "Negative, Commander. The air is exactly as toxic as we expected, 21% pure oxygen, just like the rest of this death trap of a planet. No additional compounds that would explain that." She gestured with her upper appendage at the human military facility below. Their six-member reconnaissance team was safely hidden within a climatically regulated observation pod, disguised as part of the dense forest canopy overlooking what their intelligence suggested was a basic training facility for human warriors. After 2 weeks of observation, Zyx'tal was beginning to question everything he thought he knew about sentient species. "Make another note in the report," he sighed, his voice dripping with a mixture of professional detachment and barely concealed horror. Day 14 of observation, the humans continued to show complete disregard for the most fundamental safety protocols. Training ground lacks essential gravity dampeners, radiation shields, or even basic atmospheric filtration. Species appears to prefer exposure to raw planetary conditions. "Commander," their security specialist, Creeks, called out an alarm. "They're doing it again." The thing with his voice trailed off as his scales turned a sickly shade of pale blue. Below them, human soldiers were running. In the planet's cruel 1G gravity, carrying loads that would crush a normal being's exoskeleton. But that wasn't what had caused Creeks's distress. No, it was the fact that they were doing this while other humans fired projectiles at them. "Those are supposed to be training exercises," muttered Zyx'tal, his professional tone cracking slightly. "But they're practically death matches. How does this species maintain its population numbers?" Lieutenant VRCs pulled up their classified briefing documents on her neural display. "According to our initial assessment, Earth is classified as a Category-12 Deathworld. The humans evolved alongside organisms that would be considered apex predators on any other world. Their planet regularly experiences atmospheric disturbances that would level most civilized colonies. And their tectonic plate activity." Yes, I've read the briefing," Zyx'tal interrupted, his secondary breathing bladder deflating in exasperation. "But nothing in there explained this." He gestured at a human who had just fallen from a considerable height, rolled in a way that should have shattered every bone in their endoskeleton, and then jumped up laughing. The team's cultural specialist, Dr. Zyx'tal, finally spoke up, her voice trembling with academic excitement. "I have a theory, Commander. What if they don't know?" "Don't know what?" "That they're on a death world. What if they think this is normal?" The entire observation team fell silent as they contemplated this horrifying possibility. Their collective chromatophores cycled through shades of realization gold and terror crimson. "Update the report," Commander Zyx'tal said finally, his voice hollow. "Priority 1 observation: the human species appears to be fundamentally unaware of their own planet's hostile nature. They have adapted to conditions that would be considered apocalyptic on any civilized world, to the point where they casually incorporate lethal scenarios into their basic training routines. Request immediate reassessment of invasion plans. Addendum: send more observation pods. Nobody at high command is going to believe this without multiple confirmations." Below them, a human instructor was cheerfully explaining to their students how to properly break a hold by dislocating their own shoulder. The aliens watched in unified horror as the humans nodded along, as if this was perfectly reasonable advice. "And to think," whispered Creeks, "this is just their basic training facility. Imagine what their actual combat looks like." Commander Zyx'tal's chromatophores went completely black at that thought. "Let's hope we never have to find out. All right, you beautiful disasters," Lieutenant Kai Rodriguez's voice boomed across the training ground, causing several of the alien observers to flinch involuntarily. "Today we're going to learn how to properly get our asses kicked." Commander Zyx'tal's translator matrix struggled for several seconds with that statement before simply displaying an error message. He made a note to have the linguistics team review the software for malfunction. The human lieutenant stood before his troops, a wide grin spread across his face that exposed far too many teeth for the alien's comfort. Next to him, Sergeant Maya Chen cracked her knuckles a sound that made Dr. Mix Tara whimpers softly as her medical sensors automatically calculated the force required to produce such acoustics. Watch closely, Rodriguez continued, gesturing to Chen. Sarge here is going to demonstrate why you never, ever let someone get you in a headlock unless you're prepared to use their own weight against them. Before the aliens could process what was happening, the two humans engaged in what appeared to be lethal combat. Chen grabbed Rodriguez in what Crix's combat analysis definitely confirmed as a killing hold. The lieutenant's face began to turn an alarming shade of red. "Now pay attention to my feet placement," Rodriguez managed to gasp out, somehow still teaching while being strangled. With a move that defied several laws of physics, according to Lieutenant Zyx'tal's frantically beeping instruments, he shifted his weight, twisted his body in a way that should have snapped his spine, and somehow sent Chen flying through the air. The sergeant hit the ground with a thud that made the alien observer's exoskeletons rattle in sympathy. But instead of lying there dead or at least grievously injured, she rolled to her feet, laughing. "Nice one, LT. But you telegraphed the hip twist. Let's show them what happens when someone tries to counter that." Documenting possible evidence of human regenerative abilities, Dr. Mike's Tara mumbled into her recorder. "Subject shows no signs of injury from impact that registered on our sensors as equivalent to a small vehicular collision." The demonstration continued, each example more horrifying than the last. Humans voluntarily put themselves in joint locks, then demonstrated various ways to escape by deliberately dislocating their own limbs. They practiced falling from heights that the aliens' medical database insisted should result in multiple fractures, only to bounce back up like nothing had happened. "Remember, if you hear a crack, that's probably just cartilage," Rodriguez called out cheerfully after one particularly nasty demonstration. "Walk it off, maybe pop a couple of ibuprofen if you're feeling fancy." Updating threat assessment, Crix whispered, his combat analysis programs approaching critical failure. "Humans appear to be immune to what we previously classified as devastating injuries. Recommend reclassifying most standard combat techniques as minor inconveniences when applied to human targets." The training session reached its horrifying crescendo when one of the human trainees actually did break their arm, a fact that became apparent when the limb bent at an angle that had Dr. Tara frantically reaching for her emergency sedatives. "Oh man, good snap," Rodriguez called out, walking over to inspect the injury. "That's a clean break though, nice job. Chen, you want to help Private Thompson pop this back in place? It's a good teaching opportunity." Documenting human medical procedures, Dr. Tara narrated weakly as she watched through splayed tentacles. "Treatment appears to consist primarily of walking it off and, oh gods of the void, they're not even using proper medical equipment." Indeed, Chen had simply grabbed the broken arm and, with what the aliens could only interpret as casual disregard for medical science, yanked it back into what humans apparently considered an acceptable alignment. "Thanks, Sarge," the injured private actually grinned. "That feels much better. Can I get back to training now?" "Ice it for 10 minutes first," Chen replied with what the aliens were horrified to realize was genuine medical advice. "Don't want it swelling up before the afternoon session." Commander Zyx'tal's chromatophores had long since given up trying to express his emotional state and had settled into a sort of stunned grayscale pattern. "Lieutenant VRCs," he said quietly, "please tell me you're recording all of this." "Multiple feeds, sir. Though I doubt High Command will believe it even with video evidence." They watched as Rodriguez gathered his troops around for the next demonstration, apparently unconcerned that one of them had just suffered what should have been a combat-ending injury. "Okay, who wants to learn how to escape from a chokehold while underwater? I've got some great tricks that only dislocate your jaw temporarily." The enthusiasm with which the humans volunteered for this exercise finally broke Crix, their security specialist. His scales shifted to the white of complete surrender as he curled into a defensive ball. "Commander," he whimpered, "permission to request immediate transfer to a nice, safe combat zone. Perhaps one of those plasma storm fronts in the Cygnus sector." Zyx'tal couldn't even bring himself to respond as he watched the humans cheerfully practice drowning each other. He simply continued documenting what he was increasingly certain would be classified as a nightmare scenario by any rational species standards. Below, Lieutenant Rodriguez was now demonstrating how to use your own dislocated shoulder as a weapon, while Sergeant Chen provided helpful tips on the most efficient way to pop it back in afterward. The rest of the humans were taking notes. on how to weaponize their own injuries. Update final threat assessment. Zyx'tal muttered into his recorder. Humans don't just survive on their death world. They've turned surviving it into a recreational activity. The alien observation team had just started to regain their composure when Lieutenant Rodriguez called for what he termed light afternoon entertainment as the humans began unpacking. Mysterious weapons and donning additional protective gear, Commander Zyx'tal felt his chromatophores cycling through warning patterns he didn't even know they could make. Initial analysis suggests some form of ritualistic combat simulation, Lieutenant Vrgs reported, her sensors whirring in overdrive. Though why they need additional protection now after spending the morning deliberately breaking each other is beyond my comprehension. They're dividing into teams, Crix noted, his combat training kicking in. Red and blue markers, classical opposition forces set up. But what are those weapons? They appear too small to be proper plasma rifles. The answer came moments later when the first round of entertainment began. The sound of rapid-fire impacts filled the air, along with something that caused every alien observer to question their sanity: laughter. Holy shit, you got me good. A human soldier theatrically spun around as blue paint splattered across their chest. They collapsed to the ground, clutching their wound while giggling uncontrollably. Right in the heart, you magnificent bastard. Dr. Tara's medical scanners went haywire. Commander, they're simulating death for fun. The psychological implications alone. Did you see Thompson's face when I got him? Another human called out from behind a barricade, only to be interrupted by a spray of red paint across their helmet. Oh, come on, I was monologuing. That's what you get for being dramatic. Sergeant Chen's voice rang out from somewhere in the artificial battlefield, followed by more laughter and mock death scenes that grew increasingly theatrical. Commander Zyx'tal felt a headache building in all three of his brain clusters. Doctor, please tell me you have some insight into this behavior. Dr. Tara's tentacles twisted in academic distress. From a psychological perspective, this is unprecedented. They're not just simulating combat, they're turning their own mortality into a form of entertainment. The casual way they're approaching death, the laughter. Sir, I believe we may be dealing with a species that has evolved beyond normal survival instincts. Below, the carnage continued. A human leaped out from cover, took multiple paint hits to the chest, and proceeded to deliver what appeared to be a dramatic death soliloquy. Oh, the humanity, they cried, staggering around. Tell my coffee maker I love it. They collapsed into a fit of giggles as more paint rounds peppered their already colorful uniform. Lieutenant Rodriguez Chen called out. Thompson's doing Shakespeare again. Let him finish, Rodriguez shouted back. But he loses points for not quoting the actual plays. Crix, who had been running combat analysis scenarios, finally spoke up. Sir, I've been comparing their morning training to this exercise. The humans appear to be using genuine combat techniques, but they've turned them into a game. Vrgs finished, her scientific detachment cracking. They've taken the most traumatic aspects of warfare and turned them into a recreational activity. The aliens watched in stunned silence as a human rolled dramatically down a small hill, leaving a rainbow trail of paint behind them, all while humming what the translator identified as theme music. Adding to psychological profile, Dr. Tara muttered. Species appears to process trauma through ritualistic reenactment, combined with what can only be described as interpretive death scenes. A particularly enthusiastic exchange of paint fire led to two humans being killed simultaneously. Instead of falling, they engaged in what appeared to be an improvised dance-off to determine who died more impressively. Points for creativity, Rodriguez called out, right before taking a paint round to the face shield. Oh, cheap shot. Chen, you're teaching them your bad habits. All's fair in love and paintball, Sir Chen replied cheerfully, only to be immediately plastered with paint from 3 different directions. Her response was to fall backward into a perfect trust fall, announcing, and thus, karma claims another victim. Commander Zyx'tal finally couldn't take it anymore. Emergency conference, he hissed to his team, pulling them into a tight huddle in their observation pod. Options, he demanded. What are we actually looking at here? A species that has weaponized their own psychological trauma, suggested Dr. Tara. Combat training disguised as entertainment, Crix offered. The most elaborate suicide cult in galactic history, Vrgs ventured. Below, The humans had apparently decided that regular simulated death wasn't entertaining enough. They were now narrating each other's deaths in various genre styles, ranging from noir detective to space opera. "She was the best damn paint soldier I ever knew," one human lamented over a paint-covered companion who was trying very hard not to laugh. "She never did get to finish organizing her sock drawer." "That's because I was too busy avenging my sock drawer," the dead soldier suddenly sprang up, charging back into battle while her teammates cheered. Update final analysis, Commander Zyx'tal dictated weakly. Humans have evolved beyond merely adapting to their death world. They have somehow developed the ability to turn the concept of death itself into a team-building exercise. Strategic recommendation: never, under any circumstances, engage this species in actual combat. They clearly don't take it seriously enough to be defeated by conventional means. The sound of paint impacts, laughter, and increasingly elaborate death scenes continued below, painting a picture that would haunt the alien observers' nightmares for cycles to come. The inevitable discovery of the alien observation team came not through any failure of their advanced stealth technology, but because Private Thompson tripped over his own untied bootlaces and crashed headlong into their invisible pod. Oh, what the Thompson rubbed his head, squinting at the suddenly visible alien technology. "Hey LT, either that last fall gave me a concussion, or there's a bunch of aliens up here." Commander Zyx'tal's chromatophores cycled through every known shade of panic as Lieutenant Rodriguez jogged up the hill, still covered in rainbow paint splatters. "Well, would you look at that," Rodriguez grinned, displaying those terrifying teeth again. "I thought I saw something reflecting up here during morning PT. You folks have been enjoying the show." The alien observers froze, their various appendages locked in positions of terror, as the human lieutenant casually leaned against their supposedly undetectable observation pod. We Commander Zyx'tal struggled to maintain diplomatic protocol. "This is a Category 12 restricted observation mission. You shouldn't even be able to see us." "Oh, is that what that field was?" Rodriguez knocked on the pod's hull. "Chen, come check this out. They're cloaking techs using that weird quantum stuff you studied in college." Sergeant Chen appeared moments later, her face lighting up with genuine enthusiasm. "No way. Is this a Mark 7 photonic displacement array? I did my thesis on theoretical models of these. Though I have to say your power coupling looks a little unstable." The aliens stared in horror as Chen proceeded to point out several technical flaws in their supposedly superior technology. You're not alarmed by our presence?" Dr. Mixtara finally managed to ask. "Should we be?" Rodriguez shrugged. "You've been up here for what, 2 weeks? If you were going to try something hostile, you probably would have done it before Thompson face-planted into your hide." "I meant to do that," Thompson called out from where he was still sitting on the ground. Tactical face first reconnaissance. Lieutenant Vierge's scientific curiosity finally overcame her terror. "But we've been documenting your combat training, your casual disregard for personal safety, your ritualistic death simulations." "Oh, you mean the paintball?" Rodriguez laughed. "That's just for fun. You should see what we do when we're actually trying to hurt each other." "Hey, you folks want to join in? We've got spare gear." The entire alien team recoiled in horror, except for Creeks, who surprised everyone by raising a tentacle. What does it feel like? The simulated death." "Tell you what," Chen grinned, pulling out a spare paint marker. "Why don't we show you?" "LT permission to initiate first contact via recreational combat simulation." "Permission enthusiastically granted, Sergeant." "Doctor Mixtara, is it? Would you mind standing by with your medical scanners? Might help ease some concerns if you can monitor their vital signs during play." Dr. Mixtara's tentacles twisted in a mix of professional interest and existential dread. You want me to document their first exposure to human combat training methods from a medical perspective?" "Exactly. See, we're being all scientific about it." Rodriguez turned to address the rest of his troops, who had gathered around the alien pod with expressions of increasing delight. "All right, people, let's give our galactic friends here a proper introduction to human recreational activities. Thompson, go get the newbie gear." What followed was, in Commander Zyx'tal's professional opinion, either first contact gone horribly wrong or horribly right. He still wasn't sure which. The humans, displaying that terrifying enthusiasm they showed for all potentially lethal activities, began fitting the aliens with protective gear. They took special care to modify the equipment for various appendages and sensory organs, all while cheerfully explaining the rules of simulated combat. So remember, Chen demonstrated proper paint marker handling to a thoroughly overwhelmed Crix. If you get hit, you're not actually dead, but try to make it fun. Personal style counts for bonus points. Bonus points. Crix's scales shifted through patterns of confusion. In death. Exactly. Watch this, Thompson, hit me. The private happily obliged, splattering Chen with paint. She immediately launched into an elaborate performance. The paint. It burns with the fire of 1,000 suns. I see a bright light, and in that light, someone didn't clean the coffee maker again. She collapsed with theatrical grace. See, she popped back up, grinning. Like that. Though feel free to develop your own style. Commander Zyx'tal watched in mounting disbelief as his elite reconnaissance team was gradually kitted out for what the humans insisted on calling casual afternoon entertainment. Lieutenant VRCS was particularly concerned about the physics of it all, but the impact velocity of the paint projectiles. His carefully calibrated Rodriguez assured her, "We're not completely reckless, you know. We save that for the real training." That wasn't real training this morning. Oh no, that was real training. But like level 1 stuff. Basic falls, simple breaks, standard dislocation techniques. Nothing too crazy. The aliens collectively decided not to ask what constituted crazy by human standards. As they were led back down to the training ground, Dr. Mixtara cornered Rodriguez with what she felt was a crucial scientific inquiry. "Lieutenant, I must ask, how does your species maintain such a cavalier attitude toward activities that should trigger intense survival instincts?" Rodriguez considered this while helping adjust her protective vest. "Well, Doc, look at it this way, we evolved on a planet that's constantly trying to kill us, right? So we figured, why fight it? Better to lean into it, learn to laugh at it. Can't let a little thing like potential death get in the way of a good time." But she gestured helplessly at the paint-splattered training ground. "You turn it into entertainment. Best way to learn is to have fun doing it," he shrugged. "Besides, have you seen our planet? If we took every potentially lethal situation seriously, we'd never get anything done." Before Dr. Mixtara could process this fundamentally terrifying approach to existence, the first round of alien-inclusive training began. To everyone's surprise, it was Crix who adapted first. After taking his first paint hit, he fell backward with all 4 legs in the air, his chromatophores cycling through a rainbow pattern that actually drew applause from the human soldiers. Now that's what I call commitment to the role. Chen called out. Extra points for the color show. Gradually, painfully, the aliens began to understand not the humans' disregard for death, perhaps, but their ability to face it with laughter. There was a certain freedom, they discovered, in treating mortality as more of a guideline than a rule. Commander Zyx'tal, watching his team awkwardly but enthusiastically participate in simulated combat with creatures that had evolved on a death world, made his final observation note. Update to species assessment: humans have not merely survived their hostile environment. They have achieved something far more dangerous. They've learned to enjoy it. Recommendation: immediate alliance. If we can't beat them, we definitely want them on our side. A paint round caught him squarely in the face shield. "Less documenting, more dying," dramatically Rodriguez called out cheerfully. "Come on, Commander, show us what you've got." And to his own eternal surprise, Commander Zyx'tal found himself doing exactly that. "All right, Interstellar Squad," Lieutenant Rodriguez called out, addressing the peculiar mix of paint-splattered humans and thoroughly traumatized aliens. "Time for some proper cross-species team building." "Please tell me this doesn't involve more dislocations," Commander Zyx'tal muttered, his chromatophores still stuck in a pattern that roughly translated to "what am I doing with my life?" "Nah, we'll save that for advanced alien training," Rodriguez grinned. "Today we're doing the obstacle course." The aliens stared at what the humans called an obstacle course, but what their threat assessment programs categorized as elaborate death trap. Various platforms, ropes, walls, and tunnels stretched out before them, all designed with apparent disregard for basic safety protocols. Lieutenant VRC's Chen approached the science officer, who was frantically scanning the course. "Want to be my partner for the tire run?" Those circular objects are meant to be. Run through Zyx'tal's tentacles curled in confusion. But the gravitational calculations alone. Less math, more movement. Chen grabbed one of Zyx'tal's appendages. Watch me first. The sergeant proceeded to demonstrate what she called a simple tire run, moving through the obstacles with a speed and grace that had Zyx'tal's scientific instruments giving up in protest. Now you try. What followed was perhaps the most cautious tire navigation in human military history. Zyx'tal analyzed each tire's position, calculated optimal entry vectors, and moved with all the speed of a particularly hesitant glacier. You know, Chen commented after 5 minutes of watching Zyx'tal clear exactly 2 tires, there's being careful, and then there's whatever this is. Meanwhile, Crix had surprisingly taken to the climbing wall with unexpected enthusiasm right up until he reached the top and realized he had to come down. The descent vector is non-optimal, he called out, clinging to the wall with all his appendages. Request immediate evacuation. Just let go, Buddy, Thompson shouted encouragingly. The crash mats will catch you. Crash. Matt's Crix's scales turned a particularly vivid shade of terror purple. You expect me to deliberately fall? It's fun. Watch, Thompson demonstrated by leaping off the adjacent wall with a cheerful whoop, bouncing off the mats with a theatrical flourish. Crix remained firmly attached to the wall. Dr. Zyx'tal, meanwhile, had been roped into attempting the monkey bars. She stared at the hanging apparatus with professional curiosity. The upper body strength required for this exercise. Less analyzing, more swinging, Rodriguez encouraged. Think of it as applied physics. The doctor's first attempt ended with her dangling by one tentacle, spinning slowly in circles while recording observations about human recreational masochism. Commander Zyx'tal found himself paired with Private Thompson for what the humans called a simple rope climb. Just wrap it around like this, Thompson demonstrated, scaling the rope with practiced ease. Then use your legs to, oh right, you have tentacles. Maybe wrap those around instead. The commander's attempt to ascend the rope looked less like military training and more like an elaborate interpretive dance piece gone wrong. You're overthinking it, Thompson called down. Just embrace the chaos. Chaos is not a valid military strategy, Zyx'tal protested, now somehow even more tangled than before. Tell that to our entire military history, Rodriguez laughed, easily climbing up to help untangle the commander. As the afternoon wore on, something unexpected began to happen. The aliens, forced to confront physical challenges that went against every survival instinct their species had evolved, started to adapt. ERCs discovered that if she stopped calculating and just moved, her natural flexibility made the tire run almost intuitive. Her completion time dropped from 45 minutes to a merely very slow 5 minutes. Crix finally let go of the climbing wall accidentally and discovered that controlled falling wasn't actually fatal. His subsequent attempts at the wall became increasingly less terrified and occasionally even included voluntary dismounts. Dr. Zyx'tal developed what she called a tentacle-based locomotion theory for the monkey bars, which mostly involved using her natural appendages in ways that made the humans revise their own techniques. And Commander Zyx'tal, after what felt like his 100th attempt at the rope climb, finally reached the top without turning himself into a living knot. C. Rodriguez clapped him on the shoulder, causing the commander to nearly fall off in surprise. You're getting it. Sometimes you just have to stop thinking and start doing. This defies all conventional military doctrine, Zyx'tal muttered, but there was a note of pride in his voice. Welcome to Earth, Chen grinned, easily climbing up to join them, where conventional doctrine goes to die, usually while laughing. Looking down at the training ground, where his team was gradually learning to move more like humans, which is to say, with a reckless disregard for personal safety that somehow worked, Commander Zyx'tal felt his chromatophores shift to a pattern he'd never displayed before. Commander Dr. Zyx'tal called up, her medical scanners whirring. Your color pattern. I've never seen that combination before. Neither have I, he admitted, realizing with a start that he was actually enjoying himself. I believe, Doctor, that we may need to update our species database. Humans aren't just adapting to their death world, they're teaching others to adapt too. Less talking, more training, Rodriguez called out. Who's ready for the advanced course? The collective alien groan was almost, but not quite, drowned out by human laughter. One standard galactic week after their first contact with the human training facility, Commander Zyx'tal's team gathered in their observation pod for the last time. The once pristine interior was now decorated with paint splatters in colors their species could barely perceive. And someone, probably Thompson, had stuck a "My First Deathworld Experience" sticker on their main console. Final report recording commencing. Zyx'tal announced, his chromatophores cycling through what his team now recognized as his professional with underlying amusement pattern. High Command is not going to believe a word of this. Lieutenant VRZs looked up from where she was calculating the physics of something the humans called a backflip purely for scientific purposes. She insisted, should we include the video evidence? Especially the part where Crix did his interpretive death scene. Chen chimed in through their newly installed communication link. That spin move with the color change? Pure art. I was merely adapting to human combat simulation protocols, Crix muttered, his scales flushing with pride nonetheless. Commander Zyx'tal cleared his throat and began the official transmission. To Galactic High Command. Subject: emergency species reclassification. After extensive observation and unexpected direct interaction, we must insist on the immediate reclassification of humanity from Category 12 Deathworlders to recreational Deathworlders. This new classification is necessary as the species has evolved. Beyond merely surviving their hostile environment, they have turned survival itself into an entertainment form. Furthermore, all conquest plans must be immediately abandoned in favor of alliance negotiations. Any species that can turn combat training into a social activity is not one we wish to engage as enemies. They don't just laugh in the face of death, they invite it to parties. Dr. Mixtera's psychological assessment adds their ability to normalize extreme conditions appears to be contagious. Half our observation team is already signed up for something called Extreme Sports Weekend. Send help. Or maybe just some protective gear. Don't forget to mention the karaoke. Rodriguez's voice came through the comm. That's crucial tactical information. Zyx'tal's chromatophores flickered with what his team now recognized as suppressed laughter. Addendum: the humans have also weaponized musical performance. Details to follow once our auditory recovery is complete. Looking around at his team, Crix practicing his dramatic falls. VRX is designing improvements to their stealth tech with Chen, and Dr. Mixtera documenting what she called the evolutionary advantages of learning to laugh at death. Commander Zyx'tal added one final note. Personal observation: we came to study a species that survived on a death world. We're leaving with the understanding that survival isn't just about adapting to harsh conditions, it's about finding joy in the process. Though personally, I still think the trust falls are pushing it. Recommendation: immediate alliance. If we can't beat them, and we definitely can't, we might as well learn to laugh with them. End report. And someone please tell Thompson to stop teaching our junior officers how to juggle live plasma grenades. As he ended the transmission, Zyx'tal heard Rodriguez calling out from below, "Hey, who's up for learning about this cool thing called bungee jumping?" The commander's chromatophores shifted to their new enthusiastic terror pattern. Somehow, he knew this was just the beginning.